Being a man has never been easy. Even back in the good old days, it wasn't easy. Young men in particular have always felt the need to push the boundaries, to take risks, to challenge authority. Most males successfully make the transition from adolescence to manhood. Some hiccups along the way, certainly, but generally speaking, they turn out pretty well. Today's young men seem to be having more trouble making that transition, and it appears that part of the problem is that we're living in a vastly different environment to the one we lived in even 20 or 30 years ago. An environment we haven't yet been able to figure out very well. So what's changed over that period? Well, think about this. Since the end of the Second World War, we've had significant changes in societal norms. In fact, there's a school of thought that suggests that the current transition from youth to adulthood is actually a giant social experiment. We name the phases of this experiment: the baby boomers, then Generation X, and now Generation Y, have all had new and different challenges to contend with during this transition period of their lives. Before this experimental time or period, there were structures in place that supported and controlled the risk-taking of young men as they made that transition from youth to adulthood. If a young man stepped out of line, the law would take immediate and direct action, and that would be followed up at home. Today, a young fellow is more likely to give the finger to the cops, and pretty often there's no male role model at home. So we have a generation of young people who have no barriers, no limits, and they're taking extreme risks with cars, with alcohol, with drugs, and their relationships. It's not just the absence of boundaries that's contributing to this problem. Young men today are still struggling to find their place in a world in which technology is challenging traditional methods of communication, in which women are more and more taking on roles that were once their domain, and in which there is a blurring of the boundaries of what's socially acceptable and what's not. This is the reality in which young men live today, and there's no point in arguing if it's right or if it's wrong. The fact is, over the past 50 years, society has evolved to this, and we can't turn the clock back. We can't apportion blame, and we can't expect the government to fix the problem. This is a community issue. It's everybody's problem, and we have to work together to understand and resolve it.
I just finished my apprenticeship and just finally started making good money. We had a holiday planned. It was all going really good for me.
A young man has spoken of a fateful decision that changed his life forever. He accepted a lift from a friend that led to a police chase and a high-speed crash.
Zeb was travelling in a Holden utility along the Goomalling Road just outside of Northam. He says a policeman parked on the side of the road signalled for the driver to pull over, but says his friend panicked and sped off, triggering a police pursuit.
It was like having a screaming match inside that car. I was screaming at him to pull over and he was screaming back how he didn't want to lose his licence.
But he says his pleas were ignored and the car spun out of control and crashed.
I remember the crash. I remember going off the embankment. The very first impact was when I broke my neck, so I lost all sensation in my body. I got taken to hospital and it was in ICU when I learned I'd fractured one vertebra and dislocated the other. That dislocation had gone into my spinal cord and caused me to be incomplete quadriplegic. I'm paralysed from about here down, so my trunk's paralysed. Lost a lot of the movement in my hands. A lot of the sensation up my arms and downwards is gone. I can't go back to my job. I was a auto sparky and can't go and do that, which I really liked. Can't do simple things like play footy with the mates, have a game of backyard cricket or something like that. Just a lot of the small things that I'm missing out on.
Our lives have changed forever. Our son's life has changed forever. And this is not what we planned for our boy.
Family's been real good right the way through.
Got a few more war wounds.
No, it's from before.
What are you up to at the moment?
If I had a real bad attitude towards it from day one, I probably wouldn't have made it through. You just got to get over it real quick. I'm lucky enough to still have my independence. I can look after myself, I can hop in my car and I can drive myself. I can pretty much live some sort of a normal life just for a bit of freedom and a bit of independence. We're converting that to a camper van, so it's been modified at the moment so I can drive it with hand controls. There'll be enough room, going to raise it up so I can get to everything, and going to put the microwave there. I used to play the guitar, played the guitar for a few years. Of course I lost the movement in my fingers now, so can't do that anymore. So instead I've brought a slide guitar, which doesn't involve a lot of finger movement, and I'm going to give that a crack, see how it goes. Nothing could happen to us when we're young. It's just like, just feel like we can do anything and get away with it. I was a risk taker. When I was young, I did a lot of stupid stuff I didn't think about, and if I was you, I'd just think twice. I'd just make sure I make the right decisions and not put the best times of your life at risk. It's probably only when something cuts deep, maybe when a mate of theirs suffers a serious injury or worse, then maybe they might think twice. Some of my mates have still continued on the way they are, and I still tell them, you're stupid, but they just think it won't happen to them.
Zeb's story is a tragic reminder of where the warrior attitude can lead. He's a victim of the warrior attitude. In his case, it was the driver of the car who took the decision to try to outrun the police, and a young man's life has been fundamentally changed as a result of that. But Zeb freely admits he once had that attitude too. Young men are, by their very nature, risk takers. Our challenge is to challenge them to take appropriate risks and to consider all the consequences of their risk taking, to help them direct that risk taking into something constructive. We shouldn't demonise young men for doing what comes naturally to them, but we do need to funnel that zeal into productive avenues. Sporting prowess is something many young men aspire to. Success on the football field or the cricket pitch can set them up as heroes amongst their peers. And if they can succeed at the elite level, they can become hometown heroes, and that's great. But somehow, we need to make young men understand that there are other success stories that we can celebrate and that they can aspire to.
Natural left footer. Has he got the accuracy? I think he has.
I wasn't very good at school. I always wanted to play footy. If you ask my mum, she would say it was a bad thing that I got drafted to the Fremantle Footy Club at the age of 17 and taken away from my family. The supervision that I had with mum and dad was a pretty strict Catholic family, and to come over to Western Australia with no boundaries, my lord, it was open slather.
Heath Black to bring it in, runner-up in the best and fairest at the Dockers last season.
By round 4 of my first year, I was propelled into playing league football. For a young kid with no boundaries, that's extremely dangerous. All these things manifest into getting up to no good on the weekends. I was in the prime of my career. I was playing good football, but I was also partying just as hard off the field with alcohol. I had 2 children and in a relationship, so the bubble was going to burst, and ultimately I was kicked out of home and lived in a car for 4 weeks. Was that rock bottom? No, it wasn't.
Heath Black, after another brush with the law.
There was still 2 or 3 assault charges and also a drink driving charge. That definitely was rock bottom, and I booked myself in to see a psychiatrist. I got in there and I walked out literally an hour and a half later with a script to take lithium, which was a mood stabiliser. And I'll tell you what, that was the beginning of the hope that I could regain my life. Every day I get challenged with my condition, maybe 5 or 6 times a day. I totally understand that I'll be medicated for the rest of my life with this, but I have this passion now to teach and preach about what I've gone through to help other people. If I took myself back to 20 and I had my time again, obviously binge drinking, I would have addressed that a hell of a lot earlier. I have been fortunate enough to not kill anyone in acts of violence and also driving, but I'll tell you what, I've come extremely close. For me, 28 was too late. It was 8 years too late. So confide in your mates, that's the most important thing, even if it's your mum and dad. But if you can't speak to these people and you're out of control with your drinking or drug taking, seek help from a psychologist, because they know how to treat this sort of stuff. And don't let it get out of hand like it did with me.
What Heath has done is impressive. He's beaten the booze, he's controlled his depression, he's turned his life around. His story is one we see repeated over and over again. High-profile success, lack of boundaries, and a tendency to follow the herd. Our young men need to understand that independent thinking that is not influenced by peer pressure, can be the most successful thing they can ever do. That's what Heath has finally managed. It's been a hard road, but we celebrate his success. So many young men today rely on their mates for advice on how to get on with their lives. And there's no doubt that young men need a strong network of mates or friends. But there's never a time in a man's life that he doesn't need a mentor.
I'm now in final year of medicine. I'm at UWA, so I've done 7 years at uni. So I'm just really starting my career. I think I am ready to make that next step and to go out and to have a bit of responsibility, to be able to make decisions and to enter the workforce in that way. I'm fortunate to live at St George's College as a residential tutor. I guess the biggest difficulty for me was trying to decide what I wanted to do. I think I'm very fortunate that I did make the right choice and I have ended up in a place where I'm very happy. But that process of making that decision and getting to that stage was a very tricky one. With every major decision, I'm one of these people that likes to talk it through with people and with a mentor.
Getting away from home and getting out into somewhere where you're not known and having to stand on your own 2 feet.
Even now, thinking about decisions of where to go next year, where I should work, what my future course of study should be, what specialty to choose, all of that is really useful to talk through with someone who's a mentor. And that's been a very important thing for me, to have just someone to listen to what I'm saying and then also to ask some good questions back. When I arrived at college, I lived here when I was in my first and second year of university, and the warden changed during that time to become John Inverarity. One of the things about this Victorian hospital in particular is that they have a mentoring program where they have a senior clinician who mentors you. John has been a very important mentor for me over the last few years. People often think of a mentor as someone in their field, but John's an educator and a cricketer, and he has not very good understanding of what happens in medicine, which is really valuable for me because it means that I have to explain specific problems about career to him and I have to talk through things, and it helps me to clarify in my own mind what I'm talking about. The other great thing about John is that he is quite a bit older than me, and he's at a very different stage in his life and career, and having that perspective and that wisdom which he's gained over all of those years is very valuable. Mentors can be any sort of person, and you might not necessarily recognise them as a mentor until a lot further down the track. until you've had a few conversations and they've given you some great advice. I've been fortunate to have male and female mentors, and they both bring very different things to the table and very different perspectives. I've had people who are significantly older than me and people who are not so different in age, and there's benefits to those as well. And it helps you to recognise that this isn't just me who's having trouble with these things, it's happened to every other bloke since the start of time. And I think that's a really valuable thing, to spread your net wide and to think of everyone who you have a good relationship with as someone who might be able to give you good advice. And that's what a mentor really is. Someone who can give you good advice and whose opinion you respect, but you respect it enough that you don't necessarily have to always agree with it.
A mentor can keep a young man safe by being a sounding board, a confidant, and someone to turn to when life gets a bit overwhelming, and it always does. The relationship Andrew and John have is one of those. Some people think it's a father we should turn to when the going gets tough, but sometimes a father is too close, too involved. In many cases, someone who's just a bit removed can be the best mentor a young man can have. What all this means can be distilled into 4 simple messages. First off, a young bloke today must think for himself. Second, he needs to understand that he is in control of his own destiny. Third, he has to learn to accept the consequences of his own decisions. And most importantly, he needs to understand that risk-taking behaviour needs to be channelled into improving his life, making a success of it, rather than destroying it. We all need to be involved in this quest to help our young men manage the risks they face during this time of transition to manhood. Older people need to stop judging, to stop telling young people how good it was back in our day, because the reality is it wasn't that good back there either. And we need to stop telling them how bad they are, when they're not. They're living an experiment that's significantly different to what we went through, and they need our help, not our judgment. We need to listen to them and guide them and support them as they make the transition. And young men need to help themselves too, by taking control of their lives and managing their own destinies. They need to know that there are people who understand that risk-taking is normal behaviour for young men, and who can help them guide those risk-taking impulses into something constructive and rewarding. They need to know that managing risk is not an admission of failure, but an indicator of strength, and that above all, they are valuable and important members of our community, and we treasure them.